Chapter 1. The Silence of the Days. The dawn was barely breaking on the horizon when Mercedes leaned on the old kitchen railing. Her bones creaked as she bent over the bucket of water. At 81 years old, every movement was a battle against her own body. The soaked rag she held between her trembling fingers brushed the floor as if seeking silent redemption. "Still scrubbing, old woman?" Romina's voice, her daughter-in-law, shattered the silence like a whip. Mercedes didn't answer. She knew any word was useless. Romina leaned against the door frame, crossing her arms, observing with contempt. "At this rate, you'll be finished by next Christmas. Or are you planning to leave the kitchen like you left it yesterday?" Disgusting! Mercedes pressed her lips together. Her back burned and her knees were about to give out. But she had no choice. Ever since her son Ernesto brought her to live with them after her fall, life had transformed into a prison without bars. Romina leaned towards her with a twisted smile. "And don't you even think about saying anything to Ernesto, understood? Because if you do, I swear I'll send you to the worst nursing home I can find. One of those where they forget to feed you." Mercedes nodded without looking up. Her soul was as fragile as her body. Hours later, the sound of keys in the lock changed the atmosphere as if by magic. Romina, who seconds before had thrown a dirty towel at the old woman's feet, hurried to fix her hair and smile. "Love, so good you're home early," she exclaimed sweetly, rushing to hug Ernesto. Mercedes, from the kitchen, watched in silence. Her son smiled, exhausted from work, without suspecting the hell his mother was living. "How's my favorite mom?" he asked, approaching to kiss her on the forehead. Mercedes didn't get to answer. Romina cut in. "Your mother has been a bit tired today. I told her to rest, but you know how she is. She insists on helping with everything." Ernesto looked at her tenderly. "Mom, you shouldn't push yourself so hard." Mercedes wanted to scream. She wanted to tell him it wasn't her choice, that Romina forced her to clean, that she humiliated her. But fear paralyzed her. What if he didn't believe her? What if Romina carried out her threats? During dinner, Mercedes served the plates with rehearsed submission. When it was her turn, Romina barely dropped a spoonful of rice and half a meatball onto her plate. "With your diabetes, you can't eat so much," she commented with a tone of feigned concern. Mercedes's stomach growled. She hadn't had breakfast or lunch, but she just nodded in silence. "Talia is right, Mom," said Ernesto. "We must take care of your health." During the rest of the evening, Romina maintained her flawless performance. Smiles, anecdotes, and subtle stabs disguised as concern. "Today she told me the lunch was bland," she commented with feigned sadness. "Sometimes I feel like nothing makes her happy." Mercedes wanted to protest, but her voice broke. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't worry, dear mother-in-law," Romina replied, triumphant. "I understand that at your age things look different. Why don't you go rest? I'll take care of everything." Mercedes stood up with difficulty. As she walked away, she heard Romina's venomous whisper, "I think she's getting worse, love. Maybe we should consider other options." Once in her room, Mercedes sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in days, she let the tears flow without resistance. How had she gotten to this? How did her life become a succession of insults, pain, and loneliness? The silence of the night enveloped her, only interrupted by her muffled crying. Chapter 2. The Neighbor on the Other Side. Valentina had been living across from Ernesto's house for 2 years. A nurse by profession, she worked at the neighborhood clinic and was known for her warmth and dedication to service. From her window, she watered the garden plants and, in recent months, had begun to notice something strange. Doña Mercedes, the kind old woman who used to greet her with a smile every morning, now barely left the house. When she did, she walked hunched over, as if the weight of something invisible was crushing her shoulders. One Tuesday at noon, while checking her begonias, Valentina noticed something that made her frown. Through the large window of the neighboring house, she saw Mercedes on her knees, cleaning the floor with a tiny brush. Beside her, Romina gestured vehemently. "What is she doing?" she murmured to herself, approaching the fence that separated both properties. "Doña Merce," she called out in a friendly voice. "How are you? I haven't seen you in days." Mercedes stopped for a moment. She looked up, panting, and managed a barely visible smile. "Hello, dear child, here, cleaning a little. Why don't you come over for coffee? I made homemade bread, the kind you like." Before Mercedes could answer, Romina appeared in the back doorway, like a shadow cast by the sun. "Valentina, how thoughtful of you, but my mother-in-law is very busy. You know, she doesn't like to be idle. It keeps her active, right? Dear mother-in-law?" Mercedes nodded slowly. Her eyes avoided eye contact. "And don't you think that at her age she should rest a bit?" Valentina asked, not hiding her critical tone. "What happens in my house is nobody's business," Romina replied with an icy smile. "Come on, mother-in-law, the windows still need doing." As Mercedes walked away, her gaze met Valentina's for a brief instant. It didn't last more than a second, but it was enough. In that look, Valentina read everything: the fear, the sadness, and a silent cry for help. That night, Valentina couldn't sleep. The memory of that scene wouldn't leave her. "Something strange is happening there," she murmured as she opened her laptop. She began to write a note in her digital planner: "Case Mercedes G. Possible domestic abuse. Observation in progress. High priority." The next day, during her shift at the clinic, Valentina spoke with Clara, a psychologist specializing in elder care. "What if she's being mistreated, psychologically or physically? How can I help her if she doesn't want to talk? Observe, document. And above all, if you get evidence, act, but never confront her directly. Sometimes what looks like a quiet house is a well-decorated cell. Valentina kept those words as a warning and a guide. It was time to look beyond the curtain, and she wasn't going to stop. Chapter 3. What the Clock Saw. 3 days later, Valentina took advantage of Romina having gone out with some friends, apparently to a Zumba club, to discreetly cross the street with a small package wrapped in gift paper. Mercedes opened the door with evident nervousness, looking both ways down the street as if expecting her daughter-in-law to appear at any moment. "I brought you some blackberry jam," Valentina smiled. "And something else." They entered the living room. Mercedes placed the jar on the table and stared at the package. "I can't accept gifts. My daughter-in-law doesn't want—" "It's not a gift," Valentina interrupted her in a low voice. "It's protection." She carefully opened the package, revealing a small, black, circular device with an almost invisible lens in the center. "It's a camera. Small, silent. It activates with movement. And it's going to go here," she said, pointing to the wall clock hanging over the dining room. Mercedes took a step back. "A camera? Are you crazy? What if she finds it? She'll kill us both." "She won't," Valentina assured with the firmness of someone who has made an irrevocable decision. "This camera records directly to my laptop. Everything she says or does will be recorded. If there's no proof, the law can't do anything. But with this, we can act." Mercedes hesitated. Her heart was beating as if it were going to explode. "I don't want Ernesto to suffer, and he is suffering even if he doesn't know it. If you stay silent, no one can help you, and she won't stop." After a long minute of silence, Mercedes sighed, defeated. "Do it." Valentina placed the camera quickly. The small device was hidden within the clock's structure. It looked like just another hand. From that position, it would capture the entire dining room, the table, the kitchen entrance, and the armchair, where Romina usually sat to observe and give orders. "I have others if you dare," said Valentina, showing another one, even smaller. Mercedes swallowed hard. "Put it in the kitchen, near the sink." The second camera was hidden inside a small vase with artificial flowers right in front of the counter where Mercedes used to wash dishes. Then they placed a third, tiny one in the hallway leading to the bedrooms. That was the place where Romina used to stop her to humiliate her when Ernesto wasn't around. An hour later, Valentina was already back in her house, in front of her laptop. The image was clear. The dining room looked sharp, the kitchen too. She could even hear the dripping of the faucet that no one fixed. That same night, at 7:12 p.m., the system detected movement. Romina entered the kitchen with a scowl. "Why the hell haven't you finished cleaning the stove?" she shouted while throwing a dirty rag on the table. Are you useless?" Mercedes didn't answer. She just lowered her head. "Answer me, damn it! I didn't bring you here for you to make me feel sorry for you." From her laptop screen, Valentina held her breath. Her face hardened. She pressed the record button. Everything was being archived. "Let's see how much longer it takes for her to show her true colors," she murmured to herself. That night, the surveillance officially began, and Mercedes, for the first time in a long time, felt that she was no longer completely alone. Chapter 4. The Gestures That Are Not Erased. 2 weeks passed. The camera in the clock activated daily. Every day, shouts, insults, veiled threats were recorded. But that night, something different happened. Mercedes, exhausted, was finishing drying the dishes when Romina approached silently with a twisted smile. "Do you know what Ernesto told me today?" she said, leaning her elbow on the counter. "That he wants to sell this house and move somewhere else. Somewhere quieter. What do you think?" Mercedes looked at her with fear. I wouldn't know what to say." Romina burst out laughing. "Relax, old woman. I was just kidding. Did you really think I'd leave this house so easily? No, dear mother-in-law. This house is going to be mine, all mine, with or without you." Valentina recorded every word. From her laptop, she covered her mouth, unable to believe what she had just heard. That was the night she decided to go further. The next morning, she made an appointment with a lawyer from the Women's Network that collaborated with the clinic. She showed her the recordings. "There's no doubt," said the lawyer after watching them. "There's psychological abuse, coercion, threats here. Does she have any legal power over the lady?" "Not that we know of, but I get the impression she wants to take everything from her." "Then you need more than words. You need her to admit her intentions: money, property, power." "And how do you get that?" "By making her talk when she thinks no one is listening. Do you trust Mrs. Mercedes?" Valentina thought for a second. "Yes, more than I thought." That afternoon, while Mercedes was sweeping the backyard, Valentina approached her with a dangerous idea. "I need you to provoke her," she told her. "Talk about the will, about the house, about what she wants." Mercedes looked at her, horrified. "Do you want her to kill me?" "She won't if she knows Ernesto is nearby. Do it in the dining room just before he arrives. She won't dare touch you if she thinks he might show up." Mercedes swallowed hard. "And if it doesn't work?" "It will work, trust me." The following night, everything was ready. Mercedes waited for Romina to enter the dining room. The television was on, but at low volume. The clock was recording. "Romina, I wanted to ask you something," said the old woman, feigning a calm voice. "Ernesto told me he was thinking of leaving the house in your name. Is that true?" Romina turned, visibly tense. "And what if it is?" I just want to know if I'll be left with anything. I've lived here for 30 years. Romina let out a cold laugh. You? With what face do you come asking for something if you don't even clean the kitchen properly? But it's my house, too, Mercedes said with a trembling voice. We bought it with my late husband. Your husband is dead, Mercedes, and you're halfway there. So stop talking about what's no longer yours. She leaned over the table and lowered her voice. You know what the best part is? I already have a notary coming next week. Ernesto will sign. And then you'll leave the easy way or the hard way. That was the exact moment Ernesto walked in through the front door. What are you going to sign? He asked, his voice laced with distrust. Romina turned, her face instantly transformed. Love. Nothing. We were just talking about unimportant things. It didn't seem like it. Mercedes opened her mouth to speak, but stopped. Fear was still stronger than hope. She looked down. Romina approached Ernesto and kissed him on the cheek. Your mother is very sensitive lately. Don't take her seriously, okay? Mercedes swallowed the lump in her throat. But that night, while Ernesto slept and Romina checked her phone, Mercedes approached the window. Across from her house, the light in Valentina's room was still on. With a barely audible whisper, the old woman said, Help me, please, before it's too late. Chapter 5. The truth begins to hurt. Valentina didn't sleep that night. She replayed the recording of the conversation in the dining room over and over. Every word from Romina was a confession disguised as a threat. Every gesture, every tone were pieces of a puzzle that at last was beginning to fit together. The next morning, she went with the lawyer to the local prosecutor's office. The evidence was no longer just an indication. It was a time bomb. This is enough to open an investigation, affirmed the prosecutor, a man with a dry face but a committed gaze. But we need one last piece, a direct admission of her intention to appropriate the house and get rid of the lady. You have it. It's in this part, Valentina replied, fast-forwarding the video. The prosecutor watched attentively as Romina said in a low, cruel voice, I already have a notary coming next week. Ernesto will sign, and then you'll leave, the easy way or the hard way. That is a threat, the prosecutor confirmed. We will proceed. That same afternoon, Mercedes was discreetly summoned to the lawyer's office. She didn't know that everything was already in motion. She was nervous, her eyes sunken from so many sleepless nights. I don't want Ernesto to suffer, she said as soon as she sat down. He wouldn't understand. The lawyer took her hand. What your son doesn't understand is that you are being victimized, and victims also need justice. Valentina added, If we don't do something today, tomorrow could be worse. This isn't just about words. She's preparing everything to kick you out of your own house, and she will do it, unless we stop her now." Mercedes closed her eyes. She felt as if a part of her were dying. But she also knew the time had come. "What do I have to do?" That night, everything was ready. The cameras were still recording. Valentina activated a backup recorder and had her cell phone ready in case it was necessary to broadcast live to the cloud. Mercedes, her nerves on edge, sat across from Romina in the dining room. The television, turned on, let out a soap opera in the background, but the real tension was right there, between them. "I've been thinking," Mercedes said with a firm voice. "Maybe it's better if I leave. I don't want any more problems." Romina looked at her, surprised, lowering the TV volume. "Really?" "Yes, but if I leave, I want you to give me something. I have nowhere to go, at least a part of the money from the house." Romina laughed with contempt. "Money? You won't see a single cent. This house isn't yours anymore. It belongs to Ernesto and me. He will sign. I'll convince him, as always. You don't understand, do you? You are the nuisance in this story. You're going to leave, and if you don't leave, I'll make your life impossible until you do." "And Ernesto, do you think he'll accept it?" "Ernesto is soft, and I'm his wife. He does what I say." "And if he doesn't, then I'll deceive him, like I've always done." Silence fell like a tombstone. That was the definitive phrase. Valentina, from her house, pressed the button that activated the recording to the cloud. 2 days later, the judge authorized the raid. The court order included Romina's preventive detention for coercion, psychological abuse, and attempted dispossession of property. That morning, Romina was having bread with avocado for breakfast when someone knocked on the door. "Who could it be so early?" she asked with annoyance. When she opened it, 2 officers presented themselves with the warrant in hand. "Romina Beltran, you are under arrest for the previously stated charges." "What? This must be a joke." Mercedes appeared in the dining room doorway, her hands trembling, but her eyes firm. Romina looked at her as if she didn't recognize her. "You did this?" "Not me. You did it. And I recorded every word." Romina struggled, trying to escape, but the officers were already handcuffing her. "Ernesto, tell them this is a mistake." Ernesto appeared in the hallway, pale, watching everything in silence. He had seen the recordings the night before. He didn't say a word. Mercedes looked at him with pain. "I didn't want you to suffer, son. But I couldn't stay silent anymore." Ernesto nodded, defeated. "Forgive me, Mom." That night, for the first time in years, Mercedes ate dinner in silence, but not with fear, only with immense peace. The dining room seemed larger without the shouting. The television was still on, but it was no longer noise. It was just background. Valentina called to ask how she was. "Better," Mercedes replied. much better, and she hung up with a smile she didn't need to hide. Chapter 6. The House in Silence. The following weeks were a haven of calm, but also of emotional reconstruction. Ernesto, still in shock from what he had discovered, tried to repair the bond with his mother, but Mercedes knew that forgiveness didn't come in a single day, nor with a single apology. "I don't want you to punish yourself for not seeing what was happening sooner," she told him one night as they shared tea in the living room. I stayed silent. Silence was also my mistake. Ernesto squeezed her hand, tears in his eyes. "I swear to you, you'll never go through something like this again. I swear it." Mercedes looked at him tenderly, but also with that dignity she had kept hidden for years. At last, she was becoming herself again. Romina was transferred to the preventive detention center while the judicial process began. Her defense tried to invalidate the recordings, alleging invasion of privacy. But the prosecutor's lawyers had everything clear. The cameras were installed with Mercedes's authorization, and the material was legally submitted. The community also reacted. Valentina, in silence, shared the story among her colleagues and close neighbors. Little by little, Mercedes's face changed in the neighborhood. She was no longer just the quiet grandmother who cleaned under the sun. She was the woman who dared to report her abuser, the one who recorded her hell and had the courage to show it. "You are a brave woman," a neighbor told her while bringing her an orange cake. Mercedes smiled grateful, although she didn't consider herself brave. She considered herself a survivor, and that was enough. One day, while Ernesto was arranging some old books in the study, he found a box that had belonged to his father. Inside, a black-covered notebook full of notes, among them a phrase written in blue ink: "Whoever protects silence also protects injustice." Ernesto stared at that line for several minutes. It was as if his father, even from the past, was speaking directly to him. That night, without his mother knowing, he decided to write a letter to the prosecutor's office supporting the complaint. He no longer had any doubts. His wife had committed a crime, and his mother needed justice. Period. As the days went by, Mercedes gradually resumed habits she had previously abandoned. She started watering her plants again, reading her mystery novels, even baking homemade bread. Valentina visited her every Sunday, and on one of those visits she brought her a small gift. "I brought you this," she said, taking out a small varnished wooden box. Mercedes opened it curiously. Inside, a modern voice recorder with a large button and a small adhesive label that read, "Silent No More." "In case someday someone tries to make you feel invisible again," said Valentina. Mercedes hugged her with a deep and sincere smile. "Thank you for believing me, for staying, for not looking away." "Sometimes," Valentina replied, "what a story like yours needs most is a witness willing to speak." That night, Mercedes looked out the window again, no longer with fear, but with the serenity of someone who has won a war that seemed impossible. The garden was blooming, and on the dining room table the new recorder rested next to a cup of tea. The house was silent. But for the first time, that silence was peace. Chapter 7. What Remains. The trial against Romina began 6 weeks after her arrest. The courtroom was almost empty. Only the judge, the lawyers, Mercedes, Ernesto, and Valentina as an accompanying witness. Romina, dressed in a gray blazer and a rehearsed, serene expression, tried to deny everything. "My mother-in-law suffers from episodes of confusion," she declared in an affected voice. "I was only trying to take care of her. This has all been a misunderstanding." But then the prosecutor placed a USB drive on the table. "The court has in its possession over 40 hours of recordings. In them, the accused insults, humiliates, and directly threatens the victim, making clear her intention to manipulate and dispossess her of her home. The evidence is irrefutable." The judge, a man with a serious but fair face, asked for one of the fragments to be played. The room filled with Romina's voice, clear and direct. "This house isn't yours anymore. It belongs to Ernesto and me. He will sign, and you will leave, the easy way or the hard way." Romina fell silent, her mask completely shattered. Ernesto looked down, ashamed. Mercedes didn't cry. She had no more tears left for that. She just stood firm, her head held high, like the woman who had decided never to be silent again. The judge ruled in her favor. Romina was convicted of aggravated psychological abuse, coercion, and attempted dispossession of property. Additionally, she was prohibited from approaching Mercedes under any circumstances for at least 5 years. Leaving the courthouse, the sun shone with an intensity Mercedes hadn't remembered feeling in years. The following weeks were filled with small beginnings. Ernesto started therapy. Mercedes was recognized by a local foundation that works with victims of domestic violence. Valentina was invited to give a talk on the power of community intervention. One day, at the neighborhood library, Mercedes participated as an audience member in a discussion about aging with dignity. When it ended, a young woman approached her. "Are you the lady who recorded her daughter-in-law?" Mercedes smiled somewhat shyly. "I'm the lady who decided not to let fear speak for her. And yes, also the one who recorded." They both laughed. On a quiet Sunday morning, Ernesto and Mercedes were having breakfast together in the garden. He was flipping through the newspaper while she knitted a wine-colored scarf. "What if we go visit your sister this weekend?" Ernesto suggested. "It's been a long time since we left Bogota." "Sounds perfect to me," Mercedes replied, without looking up from her work. "But you drive. My knees aren't up for those curves anymore." They both laughed. There was complicity. There was love. There was time. Good time. A few meters away, the old dining room clock still hung. It no longer had a camera. It was no longer a silent witness. It was just another clock, like all of them. Epilogue. The voice that blossomed. 6 months after the trial, Valentina received recognition at the mayor's office. Her intervention had been key to protecting Mercedes, and it became an example of citizen action. During the event, Valentina gave a brief speech. Sometimes monsters don't live in dark caves, but in well-lit houses and families that feign unity. And sometimes the strongest people don't shout. They just resist. This recognition is not mine. It's for all the Mercedeses who are still in silence. May they know that there are eyes that see and voices willing to speak for them. In the audience, Mercedes applauded, her heart full. In her garden, the roses she had planted with her late husband bloomed with renewed strength. Each petal was a small victory, each stem a root of recovered dignity. Mercedes now slept peacefully, not because the world was less cruel, but because she had recovered what had been most snatched from her, her voice, a voice that, when it finally spoke, changed her destiny. End.